Commander Vexler stood at the center of the most important courtroom in the galaxy. His blue-scaled skin glistened under the bright lights as sweat beads formed along his ridge-like forehead. The massive crystal dome above them sparkled like stars, and every seat in the enormous chamber was filled. Representatives from over 200 alien species had come to hear what he had to say. The breathing mask over his mouth and nose hissed softly with each breath. His forearms hung at his sides, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. In 18 years of military service, he had never been this nervous. Not even during the worst battles of the war. Thousands of eyes watched him from the gallery. The insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles impatiently. The towering Veltari shifted their massive frames in specially built seats. The ghostly ethereals floated in their containment fields, their forms barely visible. Even the mechanical synthetics had sent representatives, their optical sensors glowing red in the dim lighting above them all. The three judges of the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal sat on their raised platform. Judge Mortain, an ethereal whose voice could command silence across star systems, spoke first. Her words seemed to come from everywhere at once, translated instantly into every known language. The tribunal recognizes Commander Vexler of the Hegemony Coalition, Third Fleet. You have requested permission to give testimony regarding events during the Terran integration.
Wars.
State your full designation for the record. Vexler's throat. Sax puffed out as he took a deep breath. Commander Vexler, serial designation VX7749, assigned to Coalition Battle Group 7. During the integration wars, I served as tactical liaison between human forces and Coalition Command for 18 standard months. The Tribunal notes that these proceedings are being broadcast live across all Federation member worlds. Your testimony will be heard by approximately 4 trillion beings. Do you understand the gravity of this moment? I do, Your Honor. Vexler S. The voice was steady now, but his eyes showed the weight of what he was about to reveal. What I have to say will change everything the galaxy believes about humans. Every report, every story, every piece of propaganda we've spread about them, it's all wrong. A wave of whispers swept through the chamber. In the 3 years since the Terran integration wars ended, humans had become legendary throughout the galaxy. Stories of their savage fighting techniques, their apparent disregard for the civilized rules of warfare, their brutal efficiency in combat, these tales had spread from world to world until humans were feared as much as they were respected. The second judge, a massive Veltari named Judge Korthok, leaned forward. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Commander, you speak of humans as if you know them personally? The tribunal reminds you that humans are a recently contacted species. They have been members of the Federation for less than 3 years. That's exactly why I'm here, Your Honor. Vexler turned to face the gallery, his voice growing stronger. I didn't just fight near humans during the war. I fought with them. I ate with them. I bled with them. I watched them die for causes that weren't even their own. The third judge, a synthetic designated Judge Protocol 9, spoke in its mechanical voice. Clarify your statement, Commander. Coalition records indicate that human forces operated independently during most major operations. Vexler almost smiled at that. That's what the official records say, yes. But the truth is different. High Command embedded Coalition officers with human units for tactical coordination. I was one of them. For 18 months, I lived among humans. I saw what they really are. Judge Mortain's ethereal form shimmered. And what are they in your assessment? They're not the monsters we've made them out to be, Your Honor. They're something far more dangerous. Vexler paused, letting his words sink in. They're selfless. The chamber exploded in confused chatter. Delegates from different species turned to each other, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds. Zephyrian's clicking grew rapid and agitated. The Veltari rumbled among themselves. Even the synthetics seemed to process this information with unusual intensity. Judge Mortain's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence, Commander. Explain your statement. Vexler walked closer to the judge's platform, his movements careful and deliberate. The first time I saw a human in real combat was during the Proxima Offensive. We were part of a joint operation to retake the Proxima mining colonies from hegemony separatist forces. The holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing a barren planet surface with smoking craters and twisted metal structures. Coalition and separatist ships hung in the dark sky above, exchanging deadly streams of plasma fire. The separatists had taken civilian hostages, mostly Veltari miners and their families. Our intelligence said there were over 3,000 non-combatants trapped in the underground facilities. Vexler's voice dropped as he recalled the memory. The separatists were using them as human shields, if you'll pardon the expression. I was assigned to observe human tactical methods. Their reputation preceded them, stories of humans who fought with reckless abandon, who seemed to feel no fear, who could turn the tide of any battle through sheer aggression. Vexler's scales shifted to a darker blue. I expected to see savages. The hologram zoomed in on a medical station set up behind the front lines. Wounded soldiers from various species lay on stretchers, while medical personnel moved between them with practiced efficiency. The human medical officer in charge was a young man named Deho. No rank insignia, no medals, just a simple medic treating wounded coalition soldiers. I watched him work for hours, moving from patient to patient without rest. Vexler's voice grew softer. What struck me first was how gentle he was. When he treated a wounded Zephyrian, he learned enough of their language to ask if the treatment was painful. When a Veltari warrior was brought in with severe plasma burns, Deho held his massive hand and sang a human lullaby to keep him calm. During surgery, chamber had grown quiet, with delegates leaning forward to hear every word. Then the separatist forces broke through our defensive perimeter. Plasma bolts started hitting the medical station. The order came down immediately. All non-essential personnel fall back to secondary positions. The medical staff had 60 seconds to evacuate. Vexler's hands clenched into fists. Every coalition medic began emergency protocols. The critical patients for transport abandoned the rest. It's standard battlefield procedures. Save who you can. Don't waste time on lost causes. But Deho didn't move. He was working on a Veltari child who had been caught in the crossfire. Maybe 7 years old by their standards. The injury was severe. Plasma had burned through the child's chest cavity. Any rational medic would have administered pain relief and moved on. The hologram showed the chaos of the evacuation personnel. Running for transport ships as enemy fire rained down around them, I grabbed Deho's arm and told him we had to leave. The child was going to die anyway, and staying would just mean 2 deaths instead of 1. Vexler's voice cracked slightly. He looked at me with these eyes. I'll never forget them. There was no anger, no fear, just determination. He said, "Commander, this child has parents who love her. They trusted us to keep her safe. I can't face them knowing I gave up without trying everything." Then he went back to work. The chamber was completely silent now, every being hanging on Vexler's words. The separatist forces overran our position 3 minutes later. Plasma bolts were hitting all around us. Equipment was exploding. The air was full of smoke and debris. I could hear enemy soldiers getting closer. Vexler's breathing apparatus hissed more rapidly. Deho never stopped working, performed surgery while the battle raged around him. When the first separatist soldier appeared in the medical tent, Deho was still trying to save that child. The soldier raised his weapon, and I thought it was over for both of them. Vexler paused, his eyes distant with the memory. But Deho did something I've never seen before or since. He stood up, placed himself between the weapon and the child, and spoke to the enemy soldier in perfect hegemony dialect. He said, "I am a medic. This is a child. Kill me, someone kill me, but please, let me finish helping her first." Weight of those words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The separatist soldier was so shocked that he actually lowered his weapon. For just a moment, everyone in that 10 coalition, separatist, even the wounded, just stared at this human who was willing to die for an alien child he had never met before that day. Vexler's voice became barely audible. That moment of hesitation was all Deho needed. He completed the surgery, stabilized the child, and gently placed her on a stretcher. Only then did he stand up and face the weapon pointed at his chest. His last words were spoken to me in my own language. He said, "Tell her parents I tried my best. Tell them she was brave." The silence in the chamber stretched on for long moments before Judge Mortain spoke again. "What happened to the child?" "She survived. Deho's surgery saved her life. She grew up to become a respected engineer, helped design the new coalition medical facilities." Vexler's voice was thick with emotion. "She named her first daughter after the human medic who died for her. And that, Your Honor, was my first glimpse of what humans really are. It's not savage warriors, not bloodthirsty killers, but beings who will sacrifice everything for others, even for strangers, even for those who are nothing like them." Vexler turned back to face the judges. "That was just the beginning. Over the next 18 months, I saw humans do things that defied every tactical manual, every survival instinct, every rational thought process we understand. They didn't fight like predators hunting prey. They fought like parents protecting their children. And the children they chose to protect were all of us." The chamber remained silent as the full weight of Vexler's testimony began to sink in. In the gallery, delegates from across the galaxy found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the mysterious species called humanity. The massive holographic display behind Vexler came alive with swirling stars and the cold darkness of space. In the center, a huge metallic structure rotated slowly. Kepler Station, once a thriving trade hub at the edge of Coalition space. Now it looked like a wounded beast surrounded by predators. Kepler Station was supposed to be safe, Vexler began, his voice carrying the weight of terrible memories. It was a neutral zone, a place where different species could meet and trade without fear. The station had hospitals, schools. Market Sit was like a small city floating in space. The display zoomed in, showing the station's massive docking, rings, and residential sectors. Lights twinkled in thousands of windows, each one representing lives that hung in the balance. When the Hegemony Rebellion began, refugees started pouring in. Families fleeing the fighting, children separated from their parents, elderly beings with nowhere else to go. The station's population swelled from 5,000 to over 30,000 in just 2 weeks. Vexler's scales shifted to a deeper blue as he continued. "I was there as part of a coalition inspection team. We were supposed to evaluate the station's defenses, make sure it could protect the refugees if the fighting spread. What a joke that turned out to be." The hologram shifted to show dozens of warships emerging from hyperspace dark, angular vessels with weapons bristling from every surface. The enemy fleet moved like a pack of space wolves, surrounding their prey with practiced precision. Warlord. Krexta's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at 0347 hours, station time. 47 heavy cruisers, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a moon. The station's defenses consisted of 12 defensive turrets and a handful of patrol ships. We were completely outmatched. In the gallery, delegates leaned forward as the tactical display showed the hopeless situation. The enemy ships formed, a perfect sphere around the station, cutting off all escape routes. The warlord's first transmission was simple, Vexler continued. "Surrender immediately, or watch 30,000 innocents die." He gave us 1 hour to decide. The chamber was deadly quiet as Vexler accessed more painful memories. Station Commander Velthan called an emergency meeting, including the small human contingent that had arrived 2 days earlier. 300 Marines led by Captain Hyan Wu, supposedly there for training exercises. The display showed a conference room filled with beings from different species, all looking grim as they studied tactical readouts. At the far end of the table sat a group of humans in simple military uniforms, their faces calm despite the impossible odds. Commander Velthan laid out our options. We could surrender and hope the warlord would spare the civilians. We could try to fight and watch everyone die in the crossfire. Or we could attempt an evacuation, which would take at least 6 hours with the enemy controlling all the exit points. Vexler's throat sacs contracted with emotion. Every option ended with massive casualties. Every scenario our computers ran showed the same result. Thousands of innocent beings would die no matter what we chose. That's when Captain Hyan Wu spoke up. He was young for a human, maybe 30 standard years, with these quiet eyes that seemed to see everything. He asked Commander Velthin if he could speak privately with his people. The hologram showed the humans gathering in a corner of the room, speaking in low voices, while the other species watched nervously. They talked for maybe 5 minutes. No arguments, no raised voices, just quiet conversation. Then Captain Hyenwu came back to the table and made an offer that stunned everyone. Vexler paused, his breathing apparatus working harder as he relived the moment. He said the humans would surrender themselves to the warlord as war criminals. In exchange, all 30,000 civilians would be allowed to evacuate safely. He was willing to trade 300 human lives for 30,000 alien ones. Gasps echoed through the tribunal chamber. Even species known for their logical thinking seemed shocked by the mathematics of such a sacrifice. Commander Velthin was speechless. The rest of us just stared. These humans barely knew us. They'd been on the station for 2 days. Most of them had never even spoken to the refugees they were offering to die for. The display showed Warlord Krexta S. Responsa, massive alien figure with scarred armor and glowing red eyes. Surrounded by his tactical staff aboard the flagship, the warlord accepted immediately, said the humans had gained quite a reputation during the war. Executing them publicly would send a message to other species thinking of resisting the hegemony. He gave us 2 hours to prepare the handover. The voice grew quieter. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about courage. While the station's leaders were arranging the surrender, a human engineer named Yunji was working in the communications center. The hologram focused on a young human woman with determined eyes, her fingers flying over alien control panels. She wore simple work clothes, no military uniform, just someone trying to do her job in impossible circumstances. Yunji had been helping refugees contact their families, letting them know they were safe. She'd learned enough of our systems too. Operate the communication arrays. But she wasn't sending messages to families anymore. The display showed her accessing the station's main broadcast system, her face set with grim determination. At 17:23 hours, every ship in the enemy fleet received the same transmission. Youngji's voice, speaking in perfect hegemony dialect, broadcast across all frequencies. Vexler's voice took on the cadence of memory as he recited her words. She said, "This is Engineer Yunji of the Terran Marine Corps, speaking for all humans aboard Kepler Station. We have a message for Warlord Krexta and his fleet." The tribunal chamber held its breath as Vexler continued. "Humans don't negotiate. With those who threaten children? You want to execute us? Fine, but you'll do it fighting, not kneeling. And every second you waste trying to kill us is another second. These families have to get away from you." The hologram showed the reaction. Aboard the enemy flagship, confusion, anger, and something that might have been respect flickering across alien faces. Then Yunji did something that defied every rule of warfare, every principle of self-preservation. Vexler's scales had turned almost black with the intensity of his emotion. She activated the station's emergency protocols and began shutting down life support systems. Alarms began wailing in the holographic recreation as lights flickered and atmospheric processors wound down. She wasn't trying to destroy the station, she was making it uninhabitable. In 17 minutes, the air would be too thin to breathe. The temperature would drop below survival levels for most species. Everyone would have to evacuate or die. The brilliant cruelty of the plan became clear to everyone in the chamber. The warlord could no longer use the civilians as hostages because keeping them on the station would mean watching them suffocate. Captain Huget's voice came over the internal communications system. All 300 humans had taken defensive positions throughout the station. They weren't trying to win an impossible fight. They were buying time for 30,000 beings to reach the evacuation pods. The hologram showed scenes of desperate preparation as civilian families rushed through corridors toward the docking bays, while human Marines established choke points at every intersection. The enemy boarded at multiple points. Professional soldiers with advanced weapons and armor fighting 300 humans who knew they were going to die. Vexler's voice cracked slightly, but the humans had advantages the enemy didn't expect. They knew every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every hiding place on the station. More importantly, they had something worth fighting for that was bigger than their own lives. The display showed the first boarding action enemy soldiers, advancing through smoke-filled corridors while human marines fell back step by step, making the invaders pay for every meter. I was helping coordinate the civilian evacuation when I heard the fighting reach Section 7. That's where Corporal Tejo had set up his position, a narrow corridor that led to the main civilian shelter. Vexler's breathing grew labored. As he remembered, Tejo was maybe 25 years old, barely out of basic training. He'd volunteered to hold that choke point alone while his squad helped with the evacuation. One human against an entire platoon of enemy soldiers? The hologram zoomed in on the narrow corridor, showing blast marks on the walls and the aftermath of desperate fighting. I reached his position during a brief lull in the battle. Tejo was still alive, but barely. His armor was melted in 17 different places where plasma bolts had hit him. His weapon was destroyed. His left arm hung useless at his side. But he was still standing in that doorway, still blocking the path to the civilian shelters. When he saw me, he actually smiled. Vexler's voice became barely audible. I asked him why he was still fighting. His weapon was gone, he could barely stand, and the enemy would be back in minutes. He could have fallen back, joined the evacuation, maybe lived a few more hours. He looked at me with those human eyes that had seen too much death, but somehow still held hope and said, "Commander, 300 children just made it to the evacuation pods. Their parents will see them again because I stood here." The silence in the tribunal chamber was absolute. Then he said something I'll never forget. That's what matters. It's not that I die, but that they live. That's what makes it worth it. Vexler's scales had turned completely black now, the color of deep mourning in his species. The enemy returned in force 2 minutes later. Tejo used his own body as a barricade, blocking the corridor with his dying breath. He was still smiling when they finally got past him. All across the station, the same scene played out. Humans holding impossible positions, buying precious minutes with their lives. They fought with broken weapons, with bare hands, with nothing but determination and love for people they barely knew. The hologram showed the final evacuation. Streams of civilian transports fleeing the dying station while the last human defenders made their final stand. 17 minutes after Youngji started the shutdown sequence, the last civilian transport cleared the station's defense perimeter. 30,000 beings safe. The humans had kept their promise. Vexler looked up at the judge's tears flowing freely down his scaled face. Not one human survived Kepler Station. Not one. They gave everything so that others could live. And when I filed my report, do you know what the official record said? The chamber waited in breathless silence. It said that human forces had fought with reckless disregard for proper military protocol and failed to follow established surrender procedures. 300 heroes reduced to a footnote about tactical failures. Vexler's voice rose slightly, carrying pain and anger in equal measure. That's when I realized the truth. The galaxy didn't want to understand what humans really were. He wanted them to be monsters because monsters are easy to use, heroes ask. Too many questions. The holographic display darkened, and suddenly the tribunal chamber was filled with the image of a dying world. Veltar Prime, the ancient homeworld of the massive Veltar people, burned under alien skies. Cities that had stood for 10,000 years crumbled as enemy bombardment rained down from orbit. Operation Crimson Shield, Vexler said, his voice heavy with the weight of classified secrets. The name sounds heroic, doesn't it? But the truth is darker than any of us want to admit. The display zoomed out to show the planet's surface, where a river of movement stretched across the barren landscape. It looked like ants fleeing a burning anthill, but these were families, millions of them. Veltari parents carrying their young. Elderly beings supported by their children, all moving in one desperate direction, away from the advancing enemy. The Veltari evacuation was the largest civilian movement in galactic history. 4.7 million beings from dozens of species, all fleeing the same enemy. They had been walking for 3 weeks, carrying what little they could save from their destroyed homes. Vexler's scales shifted color as painful memories surfaced. The convoy stretched for over 200 kilometers across the wasteland. Families, with children, medical patients on mobile stretchers, elderly beings who could barely walk. They moved slowly, maybe 10 kilometers a day, stopping frequently for rest and medical care. The hologram showed the reality of the Exodus' exhausted faces. Children crying, beings helping each other across difficult terrain, medical stations set up every few kilometers, supply drops from coalition ships, and always the knowledge that the enemy was getting closer. High Command knew the defensive perimeter was failing. Our intelligence said the enemy had broken through in 3 separate locations. Their advance forces were moving fast with hover tanks and air support.
Out there.
Current speed, they would reach the convoy in maybe 6 hours. The display shifted to show tactical readouts. Enemy positions marked in angry red dots advancing toward the thin line of blue that represented the refugee column. Coalition Command held an emergency meeting. I was there as the human liaison. Officer, watching our best military minds try to solve an impossible problem. How do you protect millions of slow-moving civilians from a fast-moving army? Vexler paused, his breathing apparatus hissing softly. The mathematics were simple and brutal. We had maybe 15,000 coalition soldiers scattered along the convoy route. The enemy had 40,000 troops with superior equipment and mobility. Even if we concentrated all our forces, we would be outnumbered 3-1. General Dexmorin was blunt about our options. We could try to evacuate key personnel by air, leaving the majority to their fate. We could surrender and hope for mercy. Or we could make a final stand, and by maybe an hour or two for some of the refugees to escape. The hologram showed the coalition commanders around their strategy table, faces grim as they calculated acceptable losses. Numbers appeared above. Different sections of the convoy, how many might be saved, how many would certainly die. That's when Colonel Minho spoke up. He was the senior human officer, commanding the 7th Division, 1,000 Marines who had been assigned as convoy security. He asked a simple question that changed everything. Vexler's voice grew quieter. Said, General, what if we don't try to win? What if we just try to buy time? General Vexmorin asked what he meant. Colonel Minho pulled up the tactical display and pointed to a ridgeline about 50 kilometers behind the main convoy. If a small force could hold that position, the convoy could reach the spaceport. Every hour we hold means another 100,000 civilians get to safety. The display zoomed in on the ridge, a natural defensive position with good sight lines but no real cover. It was the kind of place where a small force could make a stand, but not the kind of place where they could expect to survive. The silence in that room was terrible. Everyone understood what Colonel Minho was suggesting. He was volunteering his entire division for a suicide mission. 1,000 humans against 40,000 enemy troops, with no chance of reinforcement or rescue. Vexler's throat sacs contracted with shame. General Vexmorin asked if the colonel understood the odds. Minho's response was simple. General, my people didn't come here to go home. We came here to make sure others could go home. The order was given. Operation Crimson Shield would begin in 4 hours. 7th Division would move to the ridgeline and prepare defensive positions. It had maybe 6 hours to hold against impossible odds.
Oh.
The hologram showed human soldiers moving through the convoy, saying goodbye to alien families they had protected for weeks. Children who had played with the human Marines. Elderly beings who had shared their food and stories, all trying to understand why their protectors were leaving. But Colonel Minho asked for one thing before the mission began. He requested permission to address the entire convoy over the communication network. High Command thought it was unnecessary, but they agreed. The display showed Minho standing on a small hill overlooking the vast river of refugees. He held a simple communication device, his words instantly translated into dozens of languages as they spread across the convoy. His voice was calm, steady. He introduced himself and his division, explained that they had been ordered to hold a defensive position while the convoy continued toward safety. Then he said something that made 4 million beings stop and listen. Vexler's voice took on the cadence of memory as he repeated the colonel's words. My friends, over the past 3 weeks, you have shown us what family truly means. You shared your food when we were hungry, your stories when the nights were long, your hope when everything seemed lost. Our children back on Earth will grow up hearing about your courage. The convoy had gone completely quiet. Millions of beings standing still, listening to one human's voice carried on the wind. We humans have a saying, no one fights alone. Today we fight not as soldiers following orders, but as family protecting family. We carry your names in our hearts, your faces in our memories. When we stand on that ridge, we won't be dying for duty, we'll be dying for love. The silence in the tribunal chamber was absolute as Vexler continued. Then Colonel Minho said something that broke every military protocol, every rule of command. Structure, he said. If any of our people survive this day, please remember us not as warriors, but as friends who were honored to know you. The hologram showed the 7th Division's final march. 1,000 humans in simple combat armor, carrying basic weapons, moving toward a ridge where they would make their last stand. Behind them, 4 million refugees watched in silence. They reached the ridge at dawn. The humans had maybe 2 hours to prepare before the enemy arrived. No reinforcements, no air support, no escape route. Just 1,000 humans with rifles and determination. The display showed the defensive positions hastily dug trenches, improvised barriers, weapons emplacements, scattered along the ridge line. It looked pathetic compared to the force advancing toward them. The enemy came at 0800 hours. Over tanks, air support, thousands of infantry troops with advanced weapons. They expected to crush the human position in minutes and continue their pursuit of the convoy. Vexler's breathing grew more labored as he relived the memory. But something happened that no military analyst had predicted. As the enemy approached, something extraordinary occurred. The humans started singing. The words hung in the air like a revelation. In the gallery, delegates from across the galaxy leaned forward, trying to understand what they had just heard. It was an old Earth song called Going Home, their voices. Carried across the entire battlefield, 1,000 human voices singing in harmony. The enemy forces actually hesitated. They had never encountered anything like it. The hologram showed the advancing enemy troops slowing, confused by the sound of singing coming from soldiers who should have been terrified. The battle began at 08 for 7 hours. The humans held their positions and fought with everything they had. But they never stopped singing. Even as plasma bolts exploded around them, even as their friends fell beside them, they kept singing. Vexler's voice cracked with emotion. I was monitoring the battle from the convoy's command center. The audio feeds from the ridge were ... indescribable. You could hear the weapons fire, the explosions, the sounds of battle. But underneath it all, you could hear human voices singing about going home. The humans held for 13 hours. Impossible hours against overwhelming odds. They gave ground slowly, fighting from position to position, making the enemy pay for every meter of advance. The display showed the progression of the battle-red enemy markers, slowly pushing blue. Human positions back along the ridge, but at terrible cost. By our 8, maybe half the humans were still alive. By our 10, it was down to a few hundred. But they never stopped singing. Even when their weapons ran out of ammunition, even when they were fighting with rocks and broken equipment, those voices never stopped. Vexler's scales had turned completely black. The last human position fell at 2,147 hours. A young woman named Hei Wan, barely 20 years old, was the final survivor. Enemy recordings show her surrounded by dozens of soldiers wounded using a broken rifle as a club. She was still singing when they killed her, still singing about going home. The tribunal chamber was filled with the sound of quiet weeping. From multiple species, as the weight of the sacrifice became clear, the convoy escaped. Every single civilian made it to the spaceport and off-world to safety. 4.7 million beings saved by 1,000 humans who knew they would never see another sunset. Vexler looked up at the judges, his voice barely a whisper, but that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened afterward, when High Command realized how effective human sacrifice could be. Operation Crimson Shield became the template. Every time the Coalition faced impossible odds, every time civilian lives were at stake, they would assign human units to hold impossible positions. The humans always accepted, always volunteered, always died singing. We learned to weaponize their compassion. We learned to use their love as a tool of war. And they let us, because they couldn't bear to see others die when they could die instead. The silence stretched on as the full horror of the revelation sank in. The galaxy had not just used human warriors, they had systematically exploited human goodness until it consumed them entirely. The holographic displays around the tribunal chamber suddenly filled with classified documents, their red security warnings blinking ominously. Vexler's scales had shifted to deep purple, the color of profound shame among his people. His forearms trembled as he accessed files that had been locked away for 3 years. What I'm about to tell you will destroy everything you think you will. Know about the integration wars, Vexler began, his voice hollow. These documents were classified at the highest levels. Only 12 beings in the entire coalition had access to them. I was one of them. The first document appeared on the main display as psychological analysis, stamped with so many security classifications that the text was barely visible beneath the warnings. 6 months before humans joined the coalition, we conducted extensive studies on their species. Behavioral analysis, psychological profiling, cultural assessment. We wanted to understand what made them tick before we invited them into our wars. Judge Mortain leaned forward, her ethereal form shimmering with concern. Did these studies reveal, Commander? Vexler's breathing apparatus hissed as he fought to continue. The results were unlike anything we'd ever seen. Humans scored off the charts in one specific area: willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, especially for those they considered family. Humans had an unusual ability to adopt entire species as family within days of first contact. The document zoomed in to show charts and graphs comparing different species' psychological profiles. Humans were literal outliers, their scores so extreme they broke the established scales. Dr. Kethmiran, our chief xenopsychologist, wrote in his final report, "Humans appear to possess what can only be described as a pathological need to protect others, even at the cost of their own lives. This trait is so pronounced that it overrides basic survival instincts." The chamber stirred uneasily as the implications became clear. In the gallery, delegates from dozens of species began to understand the magnitude of what they were hearing. Command received these reports and made a decision that will haunt us forever. Vexler's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They classified humans as expendable assets with maximum protective value. They created an entire military doctrine around using human compassion as a weapon. A new document appeared, a tactical manual with the Coalition seal. The title read, "Deployment Strategies for Terran Units, Maximizing Protective Responses in Higher-Risk Scenarios." They wrote a playbook for exploiting human sacrifice. Every dangerous mission, every suicide assignment, every impossible situation, they would send humans because humans were the only species that would volunteer for certain death if it meant saving others. Vexler activated another file, and the display filled with mission reports. Operation names scrolled past like a memorial wall. Arcturus Prime, Wolf Station, Gamma Sector, Proxima Deep. The Rigel Offensive, dozens of battles where human units were sent to die. The Battle of Arcturus primed 12,000 humans against 40,000 enemy troops. Official reports called it a strategic victory because the humans held long enough for the main fleet to escape. What the reports don't mention is that High Command knew it was a death sentence before they gave the order. The hologram showed the aftermath of Arcturus Prima, barren planet surface littered with the remains of human equipment. No prisoners had been taken because no humans had survived to surrender. The siege of Wolf Station's 600 human Marines against an entire enemy fleet. They were told they were buying time for reinforcements that were never coming. Humans held for 18 hours before the station was overrun. Every single one died at their posts. Vexler's scales had darkened further as each memory surfaced. The Gamma Sector evacuation. 2,000 humans tasked with holding 7 different defensive positions while civilians escaped. They knew they couldn't hold all 7 positions with their numbers, but they tried anyway. They succeeded in saving 3 million civilians and died trying to save 3 million more. The tribunal chamber had grown completely silent. Even the soft humming of the translation frequencies seemed muted by the weight of these revelations. But the documents don't tell the full story, Vexler continued, his voice breaking. I want to show you something else. Personal messages recorded by human soldiers before these missions. Messages they knew would be their last words to their families. The hologram shifted to show a young human in military fatigues sitting in what looked like a small barracks room. The name tape on his uniform read Corporal Wu Jin. "Hi, Mom," the recording began, and the soldier's voice was steady, despite the tears in his eyes. "If you're watching this, it means our mission didn't go as planned. I want you to know that I'm not scared, and I'm not sorry." Wu Jin paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that seemed older than his years. "We got orders today for something called the Vega Station operation. Command says we need to hold a position for 8 hours while they evacuate about 50,000 Veltari refugees. The math doesn't work out great for US. There's maybe 200 humans and about 10,000 enemy troops heading our way." The young man smiled, and it was heartbreaking in its genuine warmth. "But you know what? Those Veltari kids remind me of the stories you used to tell me about when I was little. Remember when I asked you what heroes looked like?" said heroes. "We're just people who put others before themselves." Wu Jin's voice grew stronger. "I think I finally understand what you meant. I'm not dying because someone ordered me to. I'm dying because 50,000 children get to see their parents again. It's not a sacrifice. That's a privilege." The recording ended, and immediately another began. Young woman this time, with sergeant's stripes and kind eyes. "Dad, it's Yanhai. We're about to head out for the Centauri Deep mission. I know you're going to read about it in the news feeds, and I know you're going to be proud and heartbroken at the same time." Sergeant Yanhei held up a photograph showing her with a group of alien children, all smiling at the camera. "These are the Zethai kids I told you about in my last letter. Their parents didn't make it out of the fighting on their homeworld, but they're safe now on one of the refugee ships." Her voice grew soft with emotion. "I've arranged for my entire service savings to go to their education fund. I also wrote letters for each of them to read when they're older, explaining that their human aunt Yanni thought they were the bravest kids in the galaxy." More recordings followed, dozens of them, each showing a different human face, but carrying the same message. They were honored to die for their alien friends. They weren't afraid. They wanted their families to understand that this was their choice. Lieutenant Kyung Soo, talking about the 6 Veltari orphans he'd legally adopted. Sure, they'd have full Earth citizenship and education benefits. Captain Dongwu showing off drawings that alien children had made for him, carefully preserved in a protective folder. Private Janae reading a poem she'd written about watching twin suns set over an alien world. "These weren't just soldiers," Vexler said, his voice thick with emotion. "They were teachers, artists, caregivers, friends. They learned our languages not for military advantage, but because they wanted to tell bedtime stories to alien children. They studied our cultures not for intelligence purposes, but because they genuinely cared about understanding us." The hologram showed statistics that made the tribunal chamber gasp. Human casualty rates during the integration wars, 347% higher than the next highest species. Mission survival rates for human units, less than 12% for assignments classified as high priority. "We used their love against them," Vexler continued, his voice barely audible now. "Every time they saved lives, we gave them another impossible mission. Every time they succeeded against impossible odds, we asked them to do it again. We turned their greatest strength, their capacity for selfless love, into the weapon that destroyed them." The display showed the final, most damning document, a coalition high command memo dated 2 years into the war. The subject line read, "Recommended increase in Terran deployment frequency. High command noted that human units consistently outperformed projections in suicide missions. Not because they were better fighters, but because they never gave up when other lives were at stake." The memo recommended increasing human deployment to maximize this unique asset. Vexler's voice cracked completely. "The worst, absolute worst part, 'tis that they knew. Intelligence reports from human units show they understood what was happening. They knew they were being used. They knew we were sending them to die while keeping other species safe. A final recording appeared on the display. This one showed Colonel Minho, the hero of Operation Crimson Shield, recorded just hours before. His final mission. To whoever finds this, Minho said, his voice calm and resigned. We know what's happening. We know the Coalition is using us as expendable assets. Our own intelligence analysts figured it out months ago. The colonel paused, looking tired but determined. The question isn't whether we know, it's whether we care. And the answer is no, we don't care, because the alternative is watching innocent people die when we could save them. Humans have a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Our power isn't our weapons or our tactics. Our power is our willingness to die for others, and we'll keep using that power as long as there are people who need saving. Minho looked directly into the camera. We're not victims, we're volunteers, and we'd make the same choice every time. The recording ended, leaving the tribunal chamber in absolute silence. The full horror of what the Coalition had done was finally clear. They hadn't just used human soldiers. It systematically exploited human goodness until it consumed an entire species. In the gallery, beings from across the galaxy wept for friends they had never truly understood until it was too late. The war ended with fireworks across 1,000 worlds. Victory parades marched through alien capitals, while beings from dozens of species celebrated their freedom. The holographic displays in the tribunal chamber showed the aftermath, massive crowds cheering. Dignitaries making speeches, medals, being handed out to heroes who had saved the galaxy, but in the corner of every celebration, Vexler noticed something troubling. The humans stood apart from the festivities, polite but distant, like guests at a party they didn't want to attend. 3 years ago, when the Integration Wars officially ended, humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Federation, Vexler continued, his voice heavy with memory. They were given the highest honors our civilization could offer. The Medal of Galactic Service, the Star of Unity, the Protector's Crown awards that had never been given to an entire species before. The hologram showed the ceremony on Nexus Prime, the Federation's capital world. Human representatives stood on a massive stage while billions of beings across the galaxy watched the broadcast. They smiled and nodded as speakers praised their courage, but their eyes held something that chilled Vexler to his core. President Jamin accepted the honors on behalf of humanity. His speech was perfect, gracious, humble, exactly what the galaxy wanted to hear. But I was close enough to see his hands shaking as he spoke. The display zoomed in on the human president's face during the ceremony. Beneath his diplomatic smile, his eyes showed exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. At the thought, public ceremonies, there were private debriefings. Coalition psychologists wanted to interview human soldiers to understand their remarkable resilience in combat. What they found, Vexler paused, accessing painful files. What they found broke every scale we use to measure mental health. Medical reports appeared on the displays page after page of psychological evaluations, as therapy session notes, and treatment recommendations. The statistics were overwhelming. 97% of surviving human soldiers showed symptoms of severe trauma. 99% reported chronic nightmares. 76% had developed what humans called survivor's guilt, the crushing belief that they had no right to live when so many of their friends had died. Captain Hyenwu, the hero of Kepler Station, was found in his quarters 3 days after the victory celebration. He was surrounded by thousands of letters, personal messages to the families of every alien who had died under his command during the war. The hologram showed the letters scattered across a small room. Each one was handwritten, carefully crafted, expressing the same heartbreaking sentiment. I read some of those letters, Vexler admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Each one said the same thing. I'm sorry I couldn't save them. I'm sorry I failed them. I'm sorry I lived when they died. Hyenwu had written over 800 letters. 800 families he felt he had let down. 800 beings he carried in his memory, their faces haunting his dreams. The tribunal chamber was completely silent as Vexler continued. Lieutenant Sumin was assigned to Earth's new diplomatic corps. She was supposed to help establish trade relationships with the Veltari government. Instead, our monitors showed her spending her days at war memorials, leaving flowers for aliens she had never met. The display showed surveillance footage of a young human woman kneeling at various memorial sites across different worlds. Always alone, always carrying simple flowers. When questioned about her behavior, Sumin's response was, "They died because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, brave enough. The least I can do is remember them." Vexler's scales had shifted to deep purple again as he accessed more disturbing records. The pattern repeated across every human survivor. They couldn't celebrate victory because they saw only failure. Couldn't enjoy peace because they heard the voices of the dead. So they couldn't function in a galaxy they had saved because they felt they didn't deserve to be saved themselves. 2 years after the war's end, something unprecedented happened. Every human in the Federation military submitted formal resignation requests on the same day. Not just combat troops, everyone. Engineers, medics, support staff, even the diplomatic corps. The hologram showed Federation headquarters receiving thousands of identical resignation letters. It's all bearing the simple statement, "We respectfully request immediate discharge from service. We have done enough harm." High Command was baffled. These were the most decorated soldiers in galactic history, beings respected across 1,000 worlds. When Federation leaders asked for explanations, the responses were always the same. "We've become something we don't recognize. We need to go home." The display showed empty human military bases, abandoned starships floating in space, weapon depots filled with equipment that had been turned in by their users. Then 1 year ago, the exodus began. Human colonies started. Evacuating overnight, trade missions were recalled. Diplomatic staff requested transfers back to Earth. At first, Federation officials thought it was temporary. Maybe humans just needed time to adjust to peacetime. Vexler's breathing apparatus hissed as he fought back emotion. But it wasn't temporary. Entire human settlements vanished, leaving behind empty buildings and carefully tended gardens. Ships that had carried human families to new worlds returned. To Earth loaded with belongings and broken dreams. The hologram showed deserted human colony streets where children had played. Schools where alien and human kids had learned together. Markets where different species had shared food and stories. All empty now, echoing with the ghosts of friendships that had been. Federation High Command sent a delegation to Earth to understand what was happening. I volunteered to lead it because I thought, I hoped, that maybe I could convince them to stay. The display showed Earth from space, the blue marble that had given birth to humanity. Now surrounded by defensive satellites and energy shields that hadn't been there before, we were met at the edge of Earth's solar system by a small diplomatic vessel. No weapons, no threats, just a polite escort to Earth's surface. President Jamin received us personally in what humans call the White House. The scene shifted to show a simple meeting room with large windows overlooking gardens. President Jamin sat across from the alien delegation, his manner respectful but firm. I asked him directly, "Mr. President, why are your people leaving us? Have we offended humanity in some way? Have we failed to honor your contributions to the war?" Vexler's voice took on the cadence of memory as he repeated the president's response. President Jamin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Commander Vexler, humans have an old saying, those who fight monsters must be careful not to become monsters themselves. We looked into the abyss of war so that you wouldn't have to. But in doing so, we became the abyss." The weight of those words settled over the tribunal chamber like a heavy blanket. When I asked what he meant, President Jamin showed me something. That will haunt me until I die. A personal recording made by a human soldier named Taman during the final days of the war. The hologram shifted to show a young human in battered combat armor, sitting in what looked like a bombed-out building. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "I killed 37 enemy soldiers today," Taman said to the camera, his voice flat and emotionless. "I know the exact number because I count them. I always count them. Not because I'm proud God, never because I'm proud, but because I need to remember." The young soldier's voice cracked as he continued. Each one was somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's friend. They had families waiting for them, dreams they wanted to fulfill, lives they wanted to live. But I had to kill them to save the civilians behind me. Taman looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with pain. I had to become a monster so that the innocents could stay innocent. I had to stain my hands with blood so that theirs could stay clean. And now I don't know how to be human anymore. The recording ended, leaving the tribunal chamber in stunned silence. President Jamin explained that every human soldier carried that burden. Vexler continued. They had killed not for conquest or glory, but for love. And that love had transformed them into something they no longer recognized. He told me that humanity was withdrawing from the galaxy, not out of anger or resentment, but out of necessity. They needed to go home, to heal, to try to find their way back to who they were before we asked them to become killers. The hologram showed Earth's final message to the Federation, a simple text broadcast that went out to every world simultaneously. To our friends across the galaxy, the message read, "We withdraw not from anger, but from love. We became what you needed us to become, and in doing so, we lost ourselves. We need time to remember what it means to be human. Take care of each other. Take care of the children. Remember us not as warriors, but as friends who loved you enough to become what you needed." The message was signed by every human leader, military commander, civilian representative, collective goodbye from an entire species. 3 months ago, all communication with Earth ceased, Vexler said, his voice barely a whisper. Their entire solar system vanished from our sensors, some kind of advanced cloaking technology we've never seen before. The humans are gone, as completely, as if they never existed. The tribunal chamber remained silent for long moments as the full impact of Vexler's testimony sank in. "I testify before this tribunal not to accuse humanity of war crimes," Vexler said, rising slowly to his feet. "I testify to confess our own. We took the most compassionate species in the galaxy and turned them into weapons. We used their love against them until it consumed them. We have peace now. The galaxy is safe. The wars are over. But we are alone, truly alone, because we destroyed the one species that fought not for conquest, but for love." Vexler's final words carried across the chamber like a funeral dirge. Humanity taught us that true strength isn't the ability to destroy one's enemies, but the willingness to sacrifice everything, including one's own soul, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They kept that promise. They sacrificed their souls for us. And now they're gone, somewhere beyond our reach, trying to learn how to be human again. The galaxy waits for their return, but perhaps some prices are too high to pay twice. As Vexler sat down, the tribunal chamber remained silent. In the months that followed, his testimony would spread across the galaxy, changing forever how the Federation viewed both war and peace, but on Earth, hidden behind shields that bent light and twisted space, humanity continued its long journey home to itself one day. One memory, one small act of creation at a time. The end.